Hello, thank you for joining me today. Give me a moment and I will share my screen with you to start the presentation. All right, there we go. I am Stacy Longwell-Sadowski, volunteer board member of Preserve Historic Sleeping Bear. Today I'll be telling you about our group and the work we are doing to save the Katie Shepard Hotel over the last 12 years on the North Manitou Island. And this is in Lake Michigan in the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. Visiting the island with its historic structures and ruins, agricultural landscapes, and hidden abandoned roads gives a sense of stepping back in time. Our goal is to reopen the hotel for overnight guests on the Wilderness Island, which is currently open only for backcountry camping. After today's session, you will be able to discuss volunteer management, recruiting, preparing, and training in a remote setting. Describe the challenges of historic preservation and project management on a remote multi-year project. Learn about partnership with the National Park Service on historic preservation. And compare volunteer duties of restoration and on-site public education. And this is a picture of the Katie Shepard Hotel prior to the beginning of our work in 2009. And here's what it looks like today. A quick overview of the presentation. I'm going to talk about our organization, Preserve Historic Sleeping Bear. I'm going to tell you about our project on the North Manitou Islands, volunteer management on the project planning with the Park Service, surprises we've had along the way, and our vision for the future. Preserve Historic Sleeping Bear, who are we? We are an official nonprofit park partner to the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. What is a park partner? Well, we are a friends group and we are officially recognized with the park. We collaborate with the National Park Service on agreed upon projects each year with mutual planning and goal setting. So partners like us bring in funds and volunteers to support the park goals. Our mission is to preserve and interpret the rich heritage of the historic structures and cultural landscapes of the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. We began as a grassroots community effort established in 1998. And this was a group of people who wanted the park to save more of the structures. At the time, the National Park Service was considering letting the structures either molder in place or removing some of the newer structures and eventually letting the park go back to all wilderness. So our group rose up and said, we want to save as many as we can. And so through this early advocacy, the park ended up keeping over 360 structures and features that are maintained by the park. And these include buildings, windbreaks, gardens, cemeteries, and fence rows. There are more than 200 structures alone. So this early advocacy to save the structures has been one of our most important accomplishments as an organization. And what we do, we have evolved from that advocacy to projects. So we actually get involved and help save structures and help the park maintain structures, but also do valuable programming for public education. In our organization in 2019, we had over 6,000 volunteer hours at a value of over $164,000 when you calculate it using the basic volunteer hour equivalent calculation. We recruit volunteers for docents, preservation projects, tours, and programs, and we do several preservation projects each year. Including in that last photo, which I didn't mention, is our Olson House, which is our offices and is open to the public for tours as well. The Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, just a quick refresher, located in northern Michigan in the Lower Peninsula. And you can see here on the inset map that includes two islands, the North and South Manitou Island, and it is 72,000 acres, 32,000 of which is designated as wilderness and federally protected. The North Manitou Island is 11 miles from the mainland, which makes our project unique and creates some interesting challenges for us. Getting to North Manitou Island, we travel from Leland by boat. We use the Manitou Island Transit public ferry service, and we also use the Park Service boat a little bit, mostly for materials and occasionally for volunteers. We travel over, taking with us a lot of gear, a lot of food, a lot of our personal luggage. So we are extremely grateful to Manitou Island Transit for helping us to get to our work site. And you can see in the picture on the upper right, that's what the view looks like when we're traveling over. And on the lower right, that is the Katie Shepard Hotel, which sits in the village area near the dock. So the village area near the dock is designated on this map with the red arrow. And just that little spot and the surrounding area there is the only place on the island that's not wilderness. So the majority of the island is the federally protected wilderness, and the only way that the public can stay on the island is through backcountry camping. So there are around 4,000 visitors each summer that visit the island to camp. The park staffs a few maintenance employees, a ranger, and they occasionally have work crews out there doing special projects as well. This is a path to the Katie Shepard along Cottage Row. So the summer cottages were built in the late 1800s and early 1900s by Chicago families to escape the heat of the summer. And there are 6 remaining cottages that sit along this low bluff behind the other maritime and ranger buildings near the shore. So the lane feels nostalgic as historic pictures of women in long dresses come to life in my mind, of women and families who spent their days in the cool breezes of the lake, far from the city's heat and noise. As I walk toward the Katie Shepard Hotel, I almost see the women smiling at me from their porches, greeting a visitor to their enchanted islands. And you definitely get a sense of this stepping back in time on the islands. And you can see here, there's a few of the other cottages in pictures below. The Katie Shepard Hotel was definitely in the worst shape of all the cottages there, needing restoration. And the lower right is the Blossom Cottage, also known as the Monte Carlo. It is believed to be a Frank Lloyd Wright cottage built early in his career and is the subject of a historic structures report and ongoing investigation for hopefully historic preservation in the near future. The island history mirrors much of Michigan history, with Native American people, early settlers that came and pioneered logging, and of course, being in a coastal area, we have the maritime history. These dates are all approximate by decade of what came through the island area. Of note here is the Cottage Row summer residents from the 1880s to the 1940s, and those were the folks that lived near the village. And in this picture, you can see the maritime buildings up close to the shore, and then you can see that low bluff sitting behind them, that row of where the cottages were. And the Katie Shepard is on the far left. It's the last one in the row. And all of this kind of eventually came to an end as the Manitou Island Association started buying up land. They consolidated land to use the island as a private hunting resort for business associates of the Continental Motors Company of Detroit. So that all changed, and eventually when the Park Service came along and formed in 1970, by around 1980, they had negotiated a purchase of the island from the Manitou Island Association, and now it belongs to the National Park Service. The Katie Shepard Hotel history. So the building was built in 1895, and it was a private summer residence for the Shepard family from Chicago. And Katie and her mother would be the ones who would usually come up. And eventually, Katie took over the building and opened it in 1908 as the Beaches Hotel. And she had an outside dining facility in the back of the building that was separate from the house. And she would feed not just her own guests, but a lot of the islanders who were up there for the summer along Cottage Row as well. And she would employ the islanders and use their farm crops and things like that to feed her guests. So she helped the island economy as well. It closed in 1932 due to Katie's failing health, and she passed away in 1935 at age 67. Her niece owned it afterwards and briefly rented it out, but it was, and then she sold it to the Manitou Island Association, but it was basically shuttered and sat empty until 2009. And you can see a couple of the lovely old pictures of the house from those early days. And here is a picture of Katie. She's in the center, and she's standing next to the well house pump, which is sitting on the edge of that low bluff looking out toward Lake Michigan behind them. The ruins of the structure are in front of the hotel now. So this picture would have been taken from the sidewalk in front of the house. So the Katie Shepard Hotel project. Our project started in 2009, and we have been out there working on the island every summer except 2020. It's an annual August 10-day on-site work trip, and we have about 12 to 14 volunteers each year who come, staying between 2 and 10 days. And 2 days is the minimum stay. It's just because of the inconvenience of bringing people all the way over onto the island. We want them to stay at least a little bit. All materials are planned well in advance and brought over by the boat before our project, because we can't exactly run out to the hardware store to get more screws. The volunteers share communal living and cooking. In this picture, this is one of the early years. The volunteers are standing in front of the boathouse, which is a historic structure on the island that is being adaptively used as park and volunteer housing. The condition of the house in 2009, it was, as I said, it was the worst condition of all the cottages on Cottage Row. And it was believed to be near collapse because of the interior sagging of the second floor and severe leaks in the roof. There were animal issues early on. We had bats, there was a dead raccoon in the house. There were mice nests, you know, all the typical things you would see, but they left quite a mess behind. And it took a lot of work to get that cleaned up. Water damage from the roof and also the dormers. There are 6 dormers on the house and they're all leaky. And this caused extensive structural damage internally. So there was a 5-inch sag of the second floor and it wasn't properly supported. There was a lot of damage to all the wood interior of ceilings, walls, and windows. So the house on the inside contains 9 sleeping rooms, 5 up and 4 down. There's the spacious parlor, there's a pantry, and there's all this stained wood inside. There's this wraparound porch that creates another large space. There's no electricity back then or now, no running water or plumbing. And there's no cooking facility inside. And there was a well and pump outside, the outdoor privy, and the external dining room and cooking structure. And so you can see in this picture the condition of the porch. This is the back side of the house. Lower right is one of the dormers, and you can see all the damage from the water that was inside. There's also a beach stone foundation on the porch that had eroding mortar that we had to deal with. This is a picture of the floor plan downstairs. So there are 4 sleeping rooms downstairs and this large parlor. And the single arrow that you see is pointing to the post in the middle of this picture on the right. And this is where that 5-inch sag was. And as we got in and began to work, we realized that this needed to be dealt with. And what this is an addition to the building. So this is a 6-by-6-inch wood post that goes down below the floor to the ground level. There's a crawl space below it, and it sits on a cement pad that was poured down there. At the top of this post is fixed an I-beam that's disguised in the wood above, and we had an engineer come in and design a solution. And we worked with the park on this as well, of course, to get all the correct approvals for this. But this was a situation where the house was not structurally sound the way it was. And with all the water damage, it was not doing so well. Back to the floor plan here, if you look at the lower left, the double arrow represents the corner of that front porch. So if you look closely here, you can see the porch goes all along the length and the width of the house, creating a very large additional space. And that picture was, of course, later in the project when we were near completion. This is the floor plan of the upstairs. We have 6 dormers, and 2 are original to the house, 4 more were added. So the large arrow here is the large dormer, and you see that in the center in the photo. And the small arrows are the shed dormers. The large dormer is like full size of the room, and the shed dormers are just little pop outs that add more light to the side rooms. Again, all leaked and not supported properly. In this picture in the center with the large dormer, you can see that one of the headers has been replaced along the porch. This was something that we knew we were going to have to do when we went out there. We knew there was a rotted header. What we didn't know was there were 2 rotted headers. And so on this project, and this is one of the difficulties of getting out into a project like this, is you don't always know what you're going to find as the project evolves. And so replacing the second header delayed the project, delayed completing this part of the project by a year because we didn't have the right materials with us. A work crew came back later in September and did some additional work to stabilize it, but it wasn't until the next year we were able to completely replace that board. And just to round out a picture of what this property looks like, this is the view from the front yard looking out into the Manitou Passage and toward the mainland. And this is part of our pay as the volunteers, is the privilege of working in such a beautiful setting. So early on, in 2009 to 2011 was the porch years. The focus was on sealing the envelope, and we couldn't even really get into the building until we had the porch able to be walked on and used. So this included tearing out all of the boards, rebuilding the joists, rebuilding the ceiling to the porch because there was the leaking of the roof above it, and of course taking care of that. I'm replacing those headers, and then eventually doing the tuck point on the beach stone foundation below and shoring that up as well. And salvaging the boards was an ongoing challenge as part of our Secretary of Interior standards of salvaging as much as possible the original structure. Our crew spent a great deal of time working with the wood that came out of this off the project and sorting and organizing and recording where things came from. And we couldn't always use the wood later. We had some wood special milled and brought in. And as we worked, the volunteers and staff began to dream about what might be in store for the future of this structure. We saw a lot of interest from visitors on the island and began to wonder how we might be able to share this hotel with more people. In 2012 to 2015, we finished the exterior, which it now needs another paint job, but we finished it and we began working more on the interior. And again, working with these boards, and in the interior, there was more evidence of animal droppings, a lot of water damage on the interior. And as you can see here, we have, this is actually our executive director, Susan, who is wearing the full protective gear in order to pull down the boards safely with all of the debris that came with them. And it was a very hot day when she wore this. And I think she's smiling in this picture, but not 100% sure. So with these boards, we again worked very hard to rescue as many as we could. And there is one room in the back of the room, we call it one room in the back of the house, we call the Katie room, which does have all the original boards on the ceiling. But a lot of the boards had to be replaced and specially milled in order to complete the ceilings. We also began working on vegetation clearing to restore that view to the waterfront. And back at the time of its original use, the house looked out onto a clear area in front of it. And so removing the overgrowth of course include poison oak and poison ivy because, why not? Of course it did. 2016 to 2019, more work on the interior and future plans starting to bud. Bat exclusion, we had, reoccurring issues with the bats. And then we got into a situation where we needed to work with the Park Service on the competing priority of making sure that the wildlife and natural resources were cared for. So we went through an expensive bat exclusion process where we brought out a contractor to do that for us, and that has been successful. The interior board work continued and doing the trim. Again, this was the entire interior of the house was wood, and this was a very lengthy part of the project. Here you can see some of our volunteers using a power tool. We had no power on the site, so we had a generator on site. And on the lower right, there was some of this sorting of boards. This photo is taken out at a barn, which is on the other side of the village. So it's about half a mile away. And the Park Service let us use their equipment to haul boards back and forth. So we needed a little more space to be able to work and to get out of the rain. We began sanding and staining the floors in the most recent years, and it has really brought the building to life. It is bright and beautiful and lovely inside and out. And in 2019, some of our key volunteers went back to the island at different times in order to open the house for tours on a limited basis and bring the public in. And we've always talked to the public as they come by and share the stories. And that's a part of the work that we do out there, is sharing the history as well as working on the historic preservation. So in 2021, so just in February, we submitted a proposal, a business plan for the house for adaptive use. I'm going to talk a little more about that in a few minutes. So onward to adaptive use, we still have things to do. One of them is, the exterior painting needs to be done again, and the Park Service is going to put a new roof on it. It might be this year, might be next year. I don't know when exactly that's going to happen, but that's another example of how the park does some jobs and we do others. So there's a lot of minor repairs in order to get it ready and to be complete. And this, so just as a summary of our actual project, you can see here on the before and after pictures. Pictures worth 1,000 words. These pictures just make my heart so happy. I just absolutely love it. This is the south side of the house, and it's just a night and day difference. And we really have saved the structure from collapsing. So in 11 trips and only an accumulated 3.5 months later, the hotel is a shining example of what a park partner supported by donors and volunteers can accomplish for the park. And again, everything we do is in service of the park and the park schools. To date, we've had 62 volunteers on the project and over 8,000 volunteer hours. And this equates to a total investment in materials and labor of $191,000. And here's some interior images after, so you can see how beautiful the interior woodwork turned out. You can see how much wood is in there. We just are very pleased with the final result. So volunteer management. So volunteers are the heart and soul of our project, and we spend a lot of time together, and we also have a lot of fun. So in the early years, we have shared meals and communal living. So in the early years, one of our volunteers, Jim, he cooked all the food before we went out. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we figure out the volunteer stuff to give you a little inside view. And since we were all living together and eating together, we had one person cooking all the meals ahead of time at home before the trip, freezing everything and bringing it. And Jim did this also as volunteer service, and he donated all the food. And it was just wonderful for the group. And the group has always, everyone's been in charge of bringing their own food for their own lunches. So we just do breakfast and dinner as a group. We eat as a group at lunchtime, but it's, we're all eating our own thing. Eventually, when Jim retired out of the project, we had one assigned cook or a cooking team that would plan and make all the dinners and breakfasts, and the volunteers chipped in some money to cover the costs. So they would go out and purchase plan all the menus, purchase all the food, bring all that onto the island in like these, bulk boxes and containers, and Manitou Island Transit would help us with that, getting this all over there. And then that one person would make the meals. And sometimes, depending on who it was, sometimes they would also work on the volunteer project, or maybe they would just focus on the meals. And in recent years, we've taken turns signing up for each individual or couple. We'll take on a couple meals and then we cook for each other. And we do that through Google Sheet signups throughout the year, throughout the summer as we prepare for our August trip. But everybody basically chips in and helps with the cleanup as well. And you can see in this upper right, this is the group having a meal. And this is in the boathouse, which is one of the historic structures that's for adaptive use. On the lower right, that's in the ranger station, which is another historic structure that's used. Part of it's used for the park rangers housing, and then part of it is available for us to use as well. They're very, very generous with their space. They do have a limited amount of space for volunteers and staff housing. And in most years, we've been able to house everyone as needed. In recent years, we've had to have a few people camp outside and just use the kitchen and the showers. And for the most part, we don't mind that. It's a lovely place to camp as well. And as I said, we spend a lot of time together. We do a lot of recreational hikes after work. We would have like story time in the evening where one of our volunteers would read funny short stories to us, and we all enjoyed that. The chairs on the porch in the lower bottom, you can see a couple of our volunteers enjoying these lovely chairs. The chairs were purchased by volunteers after the porch was finished, because we said we need to be able to sit on the porch and enjoy the view. And these chairs sit out there all summer. And so campers, even when we're not there, campers can come and sit on the porch and enjoy, which is a nice bit of hospitality that we've been able to extend to the visitors to enhance their experience. Transportation to the island, again, we have people coming and going throughout that 10-day work period. And this is the Manitou Island Transit boat in dock on the island with our crew, with a few of our crew and campers. So recruiting and training. For recruiting, we find people everywhere. We have several island hikers that have come back and volunteered on projects after seeing our group and talking to us. Let me move my picture here a little bit. Including a family, a dad and his 2 adult kids came back and did quite a bit of work with us a few years. We've had aspiring Park Service employees who want to kind of learn more and get their foot in the door, come in as a volunteer. We have a lot of local, highly skilled retirees in Leelanau County and Traverse City area. And so we get some really great, highly skilled people that volunteer to be on the project. David, our volunteer project coordinator, always found it to be a little bit of luck, a little bit of providence that we would have the right people there. Certain years when we had certain problems come up, we've been very fortunate to have some really great construction-minded people and engineers and such come on the project and be able to help solve problems as they come up. We also get a lot of people just through word of mouth, press releases, social media stories, stories in the news, talking to the public on projects and at events like what I'm doing right now. If you think what we're doing sounds like fun, and this is just one of many projects that we do throughout the year, you'll see my email, and you'll see our website at the end of the program if you want to reach out to us and learn more. When we train, we've got and with recruiting and training, we have 2 different groups that work together. We've got what we call the pounders and the painters. So the pounders are the folks who are like running the power tools, doing the heavy construction. The painters are the people who are, working with the boards, sanding, staining, sorting, getting things in place, cleaning the walls, restaining the boards that were in place. And of those 2 groups, we always need a balance between those. We need a certain amount of both. And so recruiting is done with that in mind as well. We do on-site training for historic preservation skills like tuck and point, also window glazing. We've got a couple of very good preservation trained volunteers that come and they will train those of us who are there doing work. And so we have an opportunity to learn from really great people as well. We have safety presentations in our training, and that includes one of our volunteers who had some special training from the Park Service, as well as the Park Service maintenance staff that help give the safety orientation. The essential message of the training is you are 2 hours away from emergency medical care. Let that dictate how you behave on this project. And that really does get our attention when you think about the fact that at any moment in time, you know, a simple injury could get pretty dangerous with that kind of time added to it. So that's enough to get our attention about the seriousness of taking any risks. We also had, you know, all the standard materials available to us. Here we've got one of our volunteers training us on proper use of the eye wash station and the first aid kit. We always kept paint and mineral spirits outside of this building in special containers so they would not be a danger. And looking at the perks of the job, one of the, well, there's many favorite perks, of course, looking out at Lake Michigan, but also in the lower right-hand corner, one of our volunteers enjoying his morning coffee, looking out over the sun rising out of Lake Michigan. So we just usually in Michigan, when we're at Lake Michigan, we're seeing the sun set. But at this particular angle, we're looking the other direction and we watch the sun rise. And we've got a couple pictures of us hiking here. We take long hikes. So we work all day and then we hurry up and we run out on a hike. Sometimes we eat our meals late at night. Sometimes we eat our meals and then run out quickly. But there's a lot of really wonderful historical locations and natural features to see on the island. And another perk is we have an opportunity to see inside some of the historic buildings, usually closed to the public, like the Katie Shepard Hotel. To be able to stay in a bed on a wilderness island, make friends, swim Lake Michigan, have that coffee in the morning looking out at the lake, and hanging out with like-minded people interested in history. And, you know, as you see here in the quote, newcomers find themselves in a miniature social system that resembles the summer camp of their youth. So it's like historic preservation summer camp. We really do have a great time. And my personal favorite perk was meeting my husband. So in the upper right, that is a picture of my husband and I. We met on this project in 2014 when he was a first-time volunteer who had been a camper on the island and was curious about the work and wanted to get involved. So that was a really good perk of volunteering. And we got engaged in 2015 and married in 16. And it is said that those claimed by the spirit of the Manitou will always yearn to return. And we do, we yearn to return. We love being on the island. So returning, the team over the years, I already gave you the basic stats on our team, but we have 3 people on the project who have been there every year. And there's another maybe 6 to 8 who are there most years. So we have a lot of continuity on the project, but then we also have a mix of new people that have come and gone on the project as well. Project planning. Of course, you know, being in the national park, this building is owned by the National Park Service. So we are subject to a lot of federal requirements and standards. Following the Secretary of Interior standards, great efforts are taken to salvage the original material. That's been one of our biggest applications of that, through the careful removal, sorting, and cutting of usable sections of those deteriorated boards. So as a result, 95% of the floor and 90% of the walls are original and restored. Excuse me. When we had to replace boards, it meant costly custom milled wood that had to match the original. And that was tricky getting it just right. And we had some issues with boards that were not milled correctly, and we had to struggle to get them in place. And there were some that were not able to be used. And the first floor ceiling, a lot of that is new wood because of all the water damage, the animal odors, and the difficulty of fitting the new boards with the old. Fire suppression issues. Regulations as permitted by the park's fire and safety officer necessitate first floor occupancy only. So any future plans that we propose has to start with only having occupancy on the first floor for any potential overnight guests. In the bats, we had our costly bat exclusion. And then There's also an archaeological survey that's going to be occurring, I believe, this summer to include the area around the hotel for the site of the cooking and privy areas that we hope to be able to include when we have our future plans as well, which I'll tell you more about in a few minutes. So the processes and people. Each year, our project list for not just this project, but all the projects that we do throughout the park is negotiated with the local National Park Service leadership. The park creates their project list, approaches us with ideas. Again, there's over 200 structures that need to be worked on, or maintained basically. And this has really evolved over time. In the early years, there were so many structures and so many of them were in bad shape that there was an urgency to get stuff done. And now, as some of this backlog is caught up on, we're able to really spread things out and do it a little differently. So this might mean that the park may have a project that they want to see done that is ranked low on their rubric for grading projects, and so it might not get funded. So they might come to us and say, hey, here's a project, if you guys take it on, it will happen faster. And so that's just an example of how we might negotiate that. So we do several major projects each year, and also the National Park Service crew does many major projects each year as well throughout the park. Sometimes we split projects. We've come up, and we also come up with a list of our preferred projects based on our interest or capacity, or maybe we've got a donor who's interested in something in particular. So we work back and forth and decide each year what's going to happen. Negotiating the sites and the scope of work, everything has to be approved ahead of time. We create a work plan for each project we're going to do, and it gets submitted to the park for its compliance process. So we secure funding and volunteers to do the work, sometimes contracting professionals for specific services like inspections, lead-based paint issues, asbestos, log replacement on log structures, or wildlife removal. Having volunteers take on some project helps money to go further with no labor costs. Some of the things that we can do that are really labor intensive, like sorting all those boards, it's great to have volunteers doing that. Sometimes it's cheaper to have the park do a job, or more cost effective, I should say, like the roof. The park is going to replace the roof on this building in the near future. And that's something that's more cost effective for them to take on than us. Top park leadership, the superintendent or the deputy superintendent will participate in our board meetings. And so we've got a close relationship with them. And one thing that we always have to consider in our work is that there are multiple priorities within the National Park Service for preserving natural resources, the visitor experience, wildlife protections, historic preservation. These things all must be considered, even though we come at it with a historic preservation lens. If you were a homeowner, you might have treated the bats a little differently than we do as volunteers in the national park. So that's just an example how we have to consider different things. And the visitor experience is also a very, very high priority in the park as well. There's a high standard for historical accuracy, as you expect. We've got historic preservation standards for the federal government that are strict, and we have to carefully understand and follow them. Kim Mann is the historical architect at the park. She's in charge of submitting these projects for compliance, and the park staff helps us to interpret and apply the standards, weighing in on materials and methods used. So we have a project manager who will meet with the park maintenance people and also the architect to discuss each project before it's done, and during the projects as well, in case anything unusual comes up. Resources shared by the park. They are very generous and let us borrow things while we're out there. We use the island maintenance shop, and also the barn that's out there as well, storage barn we can work in. Golf cart style motorized carts, water tank truck for non-potable water, generator for our power tools, eye wash station, hauling trailer, tool trailer, tractor, scaffolding. A lot of hand tools are brought by our volunteers. Everybody's got their favorite hand tools, but we do use a lot of tools that the park makes available to us as well. And with safety, the park supports our safety by supplying some of our gear, like the eye wash stations, and assisting with our on-site training. And for the potential future use of the structure, safety is a big part of any of the plans involving the public. In particular, fire suppression is, one of the big things that is being addressed by the fire safety officer, and he's been a part of that process for planning as well. So other surprises along the way, I've told you about a few things like the header issue, then the structural supports, and you can see a picture of that in the lower right here of the guys putting one of the new headers in place. And it is heavy because you can see there are 4 of them working to pull that into place. That was a very big job getting that taken care of. One of the very pleasant surprises we get is connecting with the community during the project, talking to people who walk past and ask us who we are, what we're doing, what was this building, who lived here, and we get in conversation with them. And again, this is one of our priorities on our volunteer trip, is to be able to talk to the public. And so we have several volunteers who will, when someone comes by, we'll pop out and talk to them and answer their questions and tell them about what we're doing and talk to them about Cottage Row and the history of the island. And it's a lot of fun. People really do get inspired and light up. And sometimes it's as simple as, seeing something that sparks a memory, like something that their grandmother had, or when we were working in the barn, there was a large combine sitting in there, and a gentleman who was walking past looked in and could see it and talked about how his grandfather had the very same piece of equipment, and he was just transported, being able to see that and getting excited about it. So it's a lot of fun. We talked to a lot of people who have connections to the island history, to the pioneers who lived there, the early settlers. And so we learn a lot and we get to educate a lot as well. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely a pleasure. Surprise, 90-degree angles. That's not a surprise. That's always a struggle in an old house because things settle. So we've had some, interesting tricks. We had some of the windows and screens were taken off the island to be worked on, brought back. Hard to get them to fit into place when they were back. Floor repairs, you can see in the picture in the top here. From one year to the next, we'd find different spots of the floor that needed to be repaired. This year we're tearing out this section, and then the next time we come back, it's like, oh yeah, we need to do that section too. So that was an ongoing issue. And structural supports have talked about that. Lead-based paint. We had Seeds out of Traverse City, who's certified in lead-based paint. Issues came out and they had scraped the house and sealed it with a primer so that our crew could come out and do that painting. And working in the rain is a little tricky. We use a lot of outdoor space when we're sanding, staining, and sorting boards. And so the rain would come along and we'd have to hurry up and move all the boards back inside. And then the rain would stop, we'd put everything out again, and then it would start to rain again. So that kind of went back and forth. So we're always dodging raindrops, trying to take advantage of the weather the best we could. Artifacts in the upper right, that is a label on a lid to a trunk that was shipped to the Katie Shepard Hotel, to Katie herself. And so that was a little treasure that we found inside the house. We found a few things like that. We did get contacted by the family member who came forward and had a buffet sideboard piece of furniture that had belonged in the hotel originally. And it was donated to us from Wisconsin. So we just had to send a volunteer out there with a trailer to pick it up. And of course it was in a snowstorm and it was difficult to get back, but it was brought back to the Leland area and then transported over, and it's now sitting inside the house. It's all wrapped up still, but ready for it to be displayed for the public to be able to see. And our vision for the future. This is what we love to talk about. We get really excited about this. So we had a concept plan approved in 2016 for adaptive use. It was revised in 2018. And of course, in 2019, we had our pilot program of offering tours to the campers, bringing people inside and through the house during non-work time. And this particular picture was actually in 2012, very early in the project, not long after we got the house stabilized and ready for people to be able to walk through. But This was a special tour with the Leelanau Historical Society that we brought a boat of people over who were able to go through some of the cottages on Cottage Row, including the Katie Shepard. And that was a real treat to be able to share the house with people. But we hope to do more of this kind of thing in the future as well. Our business plan that was submitted in February to the park has not been reviewed yet. So everything I say about that is just, this is the content of our business plan, and this is what we hope to be able to do. Of course, you know, we have to work with the park through the process of actually finalizing any kind of plans that happen. But for our phase 1, we would like to have up to 8 people on the main floor be able to stay for overnight accommodations. And eventually, when the fire suppression issue gets solved, in the absence of running water out to this area of the island, that's what makes it tricky. Once that's solved, we hope to be able to add more people overnight in the upstairs of the house as well. But that remains to be seen. A big part of our ongoing plans involve historic interpretation and cottage row tours for guests and island visitors, to be able to have not just the people who are staying at the hotel, but to have more tours and more history shared out with the visitors. That, you know, even when we did our pilot program in 2019, there were just a few weekends that we were out there. But if we had the hotel open to the guests all summer or for a longer period of time, we could certainly talk to more people as they come through. The business plan objectives, these are pretty simple. The first one is to increase accessibility to the public. Of course, the public can only stay overnight on the island through backcountry camping, and not everyone is a camper. So the beautiful thing about this is this would give an opportunity for non-campers to be able to stay on the island and enjoy that and learn more as well. And then, of course, to interpret the rich heritage of North Manitou Island for park visitors through our tours and through education, to preserve and protect the cultural resources in the park and find adaptive uses for select structures and landscapes as part of the preservation continuum. This fits right in with our mission as an organization, and we think that this particular structure is a really great candidate for adaptive use. To provide volunteer housing when availability allows, to assist us and the park to be able to do cultural and natural resource restoration projects. So it's possible the house could be used when, you know, during certain times when it's not being used by overnight guests, that we could have volunteers staying there as a base camp for them to do projects on the island. And of course, supporting the financial viability and fundraising efforts of our group. And this, of course, everything we do is a contribution to the park. So we're looking at contributions of cash, preservation, visitor, and interpretive services. So as a nonprofit organization that is a national park partner, everything we do helps to further the park's goals. And that is definitely our privilege as an organization to be able to support the work of the park. And what do our volunteers say? I just wanted to close here and share with you some of the quotes from our volunteers on the project. Katie is not just wood and stone. She is the story that was written over the last 100 years, plus the story of every person behind every hammer and nail of more recent times. The stories will continue to be written with every sleeping bag that opens up within her walls. Every person that spends a night there has the opportunity to participate in the Katie story. And the structures have come to life, and our interest has quickly evolved into preserving the culture and the lives of the folks who settled in this area. Reading the stories of the pioneering inhabitants of North Manitou Island and hearing the encouraging comments of the hikers going by as we work has built our desire to push onward in our preservation efforts, preservation work, and that's Doug and Margot. And this particular picture was taken in the cemetery on the island, which is about a 3-mile hike from the village, and it was one of our evening hikes. And in the cemetery, we visited the graves of the Phelan brothers who built the house. And so being able to make that connection, that these were real people. This isn't just a cottage that's sitting there and it's been sitting there for a long time in bad shape. You know, this was a real place that was inhabited by real people, built by real people, and it mattered. And we want to be able to share those important stories with the public. And thank you so much for your time today. I appreciated the opportunity to present to you. To learn more, you can visit us at phsb.org. And here's my contact information, Stacy Longwell-Sadowski, and also Susan Pocklington, who's our executive director, her contact information as well. We would love to hear from you. Again, if you are interested in supporting our work, being a volunteer, or learning more, let us know. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.